Okay, welcome. So my name's Penny Davis. I work with the Ford Foundation, and the Ford Foundation is a private philanthropy, and we're concerned about the issues which we feel are invisible, marginalized, as well as the communities and the peoples that do not have usually or voice in policy processes. So I'm very happy to be here. I did a head count before lunch and was very pleased to see that there was an audience of 150, and in that audience there were about 40 women. So I'm happy to see that. I thought actually maybe it would drop to half. I think we're still, almost 100, probably more women than men. And the reason I say this is I was invited to chair a gender session at a meeting in just outside San Francisco. And I went into it, and we all sat down. There had been a previous session, and half the room got out and left. Only women in the audience, and we all sort of sat there and felt really embarrassed. So good on you guys who've stayed, and of course we're hugely critical of Chatham House, that they put this as the last and not the first session. Why? And of course, I will be welcoming our 3+4 presenters. Our fourth colleague is remote in Peru, but we did have a question, just as there is, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of men who've taken the pledge not to sit on all male panels. Some of us as women would also be asking why we're sitting on an all-woman panel, although of course we realize why. I have been told to tell you that there are evaluation forms in English and Spanish that you are filling out or will be asked to fill out. But what some of you don't realize, and colleagues who have left don't realize, is that there will be a lottery and a draw, and someone will win a fantastic, very luxury, Fortnum & Mason is a very luxury British company, a luxury hamper with some surprising things inside for you to take back to your home. And if you leave, but your evaluation form is called and your evaluation form wins the prize, but you are not present, bad luck. Someone else will get the prize. Okay. So the aim of this session is about gender equity in forest and land use policy making. And in particular, we want to focus on the indigenous peoples and local communities, the women from those communities that manage and use and own more than half the world's lands. Their communities own more than half the world's lands. They have customary management over more than half the world's lands. And many of those communities, increasingly, as men migrate out, etc., women play an increasing role, and there's increasing feminization of the management and the decision-making around those resources. And 80% of the world's food, I've been told, is actually produced by women. And communities are producing about a quarter of the world, are protecting about a quarter of the world's tropical forest carbon, and amongst those communities, many of them are women. So basically, women are on the front lines of environment and land use policy, as well as the conflicts around those resources. And so we're interested about how women are participating in decision-making processes, in policy-making processes. And what does that mean in the FLEGT world? Does it make a difference if you have women participating in the formation of rules and norms and in their implementation? And to have some concrete examples of that. And we had a bit of a joke about, is this a special woman session, like, where when I used to work down at community level, and you go to the community, and then to find the women, you would have to go off to the river. If you really wanted a conversation with women, you would go off to the river because that's where all the women are doing the laundry. So this is not a laundry making forum. You know, this is a formal space. It is Chatham House, and we are concerned about, in this session, how is it that women, and in particular young women, diverse women from different backgrounds, are participating in formal decision-making processes, and are they being empowered through the FLEGT process, and are donors in the room like DFID, are they actively and being proactive in promoting that? And me as an ex-government official in our own government systems, are we actively promoting that in whatever we do? So I would like to welcome the first presenter here. This is Claire Biesson. She's French. She's director of the Coalition and Networks Program of the International Rights and Resources Initiative. And before joining RRI, the Rights and Resources Initiative, she worked at the Academic Council on the UN system at the Stimson Center, and she's a specialist in international relations and political science. Thank you, Claire. If you, later on, by the way, it's going to be channel 0 if you need translation to Spanish, or in the future to English.
Thank you, Penny. So just to say a few words about RRI, we're a global coalition dedicated to advance the forests and resource rights of indigenous people and local communities. And we're known for doing a lot of analysis on tenure and land distribution. And we're also looking at women's rights, so that's what brings me today. And I'll focus on the enabling conditions to strengthen indigenous and community women's governance rights. So as Penny mentioned, there's still up to 2.5 billion people that use and relies on the words community-held territories, which cover 50% of the world's land, and more than half of them are women. So there is now broad evidence showing that indigenous and community women play a unique role in combating rural poverty, maintaining community livelihoods, and strengthening climate change mitigation and adaptation action. Legal recognition of their tenure rights is associated with positive economic and food security, health, and education outcomes for the women, their families. And this is crucial for the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, they are often locked out of decision-making processes in their communities, which has a negative impact on their livelihood, their family, and their communities. So what makes us say that is that we released in 2017 an analysis called Power and Potential. And in that one, we examine if and how national laws recognize the rights of indigenous and community women to community forests in 30 low and middle income countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And those 30 countries represent 80% of the forests in the global south. All the countries that we looked at ratified CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And yet, what we found was that none met the minimum standards established in the treaty. So most laws fail to adequately acknowledge and protect the membership, voting, leadership, inheritance, and dispute resolution rights of indigenous and community women. We found that the rights to women's participation in community-level governance, which are voting and leadership, were least frequently protected. So what we did was looked at the 80 community-based tenure regimes, which refer to national laws and regulation governing all situations under which the right to use and manage terrestrial natural resources is held at the community level. And of those 80 legal frameworks, we found that only 3% adequately protected women's community-level voting rights. So what adequate means that it required that a quorum of women be present in order for a General Assembly to vote. And also of those 80, only 5 adequately protected women's community-level leadership rights by requiring both a minimum quota of women to hold seats in the community, in the community executive body, and a quorum of women executive members to be present for the assembly to vote. So this is particularly worrisome because it shows that women cannot meaningfully participate in community-level governance bodies, making major decisions about community forests that may have an impact on the status of those community territories for generations to come. Because this is within those bodies that are voted any private land acquisition or land and resource agreements, etc. So without secure government's rights, their priorities, their unique knowledge, and rights to free, prior, and informed consent is unlikely to be respected. So that's very important for us to know because you can apply due diligence in those conditions. So importantly, also, the analysis found that legal advancements for communities and women are positively associated. So legal frameworks that aim to recognize community ownership of forests or community-based rights provided stronger legal protection for women's forest rights when compared to laws that were passed to further conservation of land and natural resources or to regulate the use or exploitation of land and natural resources. So it is critical to improve the situation. As a result of male migration to cities, conflict, external threats to communities, women are increasingly the managers of their households, and as such, of the collectively held lands and forests that their communities rely on. Their voice needs to count. So what can we do? What can be done? Well, there's inspiring initiatives that are taking place all over the world. And we heard Norma yesterday from Honduras, and we'll hear today from my fellow panelists here. And we just recently published a brief that aggregates learning from 18 organizations from 10 countries and identify contributing factors underlying successful initiatives that strengthened women governance rights regarding community lands. So those can be applied to different geographies and political landscapes. So while I'm going through those quickly, I'm going to encourage all of you to reflect on the approaches that you're using in your work and how you could provide greater support for the advancement of forest governance rights for both women and their communities. So those contributing factors go under three main buckets. The first one is to maintain a community-wide focus. So the successful projects that we looked at relied on inclusive, collaborative processes involving the entire community, so both men and women. They also gained support and engaged community leaders, as they are often viewed as the authority on customary law. They are also developed alongside communities to ensure that they are culturally appropriate. So what best practices have been to have facilitated community meetings that are conducted in the local language and also done by trained community members. That's key to earn the trust and respect from other community members. It's also important to allow enough time to transform patriarchal attitudes towards gender roles and for normative change to take place. So if we look at initiatives that were really looking at the local level, taking a year or two is common. So one example of that was the work done by Namati and the community self-reliance centers that took 2 years and over 800 meetings to review and document customary bylaws. It was in one municipality in Nepal. But they also issued new bylaws strengthening women's land governance rights in the process. And of course, if we took efforts and initiatives that were at the national level, it can take decades. The second bucket is to use information and learning to further empower women and their communities. The first point is to make visible the positive impact of women's work to their communities. So doing documentation, then dissemination, through awareness-raising campaigns and informational workshop. And we'll hear from Melania Inonamiap that will talk about that. And demonstrate community-wide advantages of securing their governance rights. So for example, in Uganda, they conducted a community mapping exercise through which men realized that women knew of a variety of resources they were less aware of. It's also important to leverage the information that was gathered to empower women as leaders and decision makers. And the last point is to establish strategic networks and alliances at all levels by not only supporting exchanges and connection between women, because it's important also to have some pieces of activities that only engage women to create that safe space, and also to have kind of mentoring programs so they can train other women and it has a long-lasting effect. And also it is key to build relationship with external actors, so multi-stakeholder dialogues, both at the national level and then with international actors. So to conclude, we in the development community have a key role to play by promoting the enabling conditions in the projects that we either support or fund, and by fostering a solutions-based culture of information sharing and transparent reflection concerning indigenous and community women's tenure rights. This will be essential to replicate successful initiatives in other contexts and ultimately secure community lands at scale. So we really welcome opportunities like this to talk about best practices and share positive examples, and of course learn from all of you. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
So that's food for thought. So I'd now like to welcome Doreen Asumang Yeboah from Ghana. She is the coordinator of the National Forestry Forum of Ghana. She's an advocacy expert at Trop and Boss in Ghana. And she's been involved in community rights activism and research and a trainer for some years.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with the rest of the world what we are doing in Ghana with respect to mainstreaming gender into the VPA process implementation. I will start by saying that we have a constitution in Ghana which mandates all citizens to safeguard the environment. And the same constitution prohibits discrimination against gender or discrimination based on gender. And so Ghana has been part of the global discussion on gender and has therefore been a signatory and part of the conventions on gender. And just to mention a few of them, we can talk about the CEDAW, that is the UN Convention for Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We've been part of the UN Convention on Environment and Development, Convention on Biological Diversity, that is the CBD, UN Convention on Women in Development, and the CEDAW Optional Protocol, which is the recent one in 1999. And based on this, Ghana at the local level established a Ministry for Women and Children's Affairs. And subsequently, this ministry came up with a gender policy to champion the affairs of women and children. And so since 2004 that this gender policy came into being, gender has been a priority in all programs, plans, and project implementation in the country. When we talk about gender, it's not just about women. It's about the roles and responsibilities of both men and women in the society that we find ourselves. And so based on this definition, we believe the VPA flex process in Ghana is gender blind or gender neutral, in the sense that there is no mention of gender in the project's documents. Aside that, until just a couple of weeks ago, the MSIG, which is the advisory technical wing in charge of the VPA implementation in Ghana, had no female on board. Then when we talk about the technical staff of the TVD, that's the Timber Validation Department, which is the unit within the Forestry Commission in charge of VPA implementation, there was no female staff. And again, within the same units, we have internal auditors in charge of monitoring the process. This also had no female member on board. And so we all know that females have a key role to play when it comes to forest management. And looking at the Convention on Biological Diversity, it states clearly that women have a role in the management and conservation of our forest resources. So we believe that when the discussions is just tilted towards males, there is a missing link because the perspective of women are not brought on the discussion. And this is a gap that was identified. And so based on this gap, there was an intervention by Client Earth and partners in Ghana to address the challenge that has been identified within the VP implementation process. So what is being done is that stakeholders in the country their capacities are being strengthened to ensure that gender is being mainstreamed in the process that we're already implementing. And specifically, there is a training session for women who are active in the forestry sector. And these women are drawn from the Forestry Commission, from civil societies and NGOs, from the media, as well as industry, so that they will identify their roles in the VPA process to allow them implement better and be part of the process. Again, there is this gender session that has been introduced within the legal working group session. Yesterday, Clement mentioned the legal working group, and it is a meeting of civil societies within the natural resource space in Ghana. So we meet periodically to be equipped with skills to be able to identify the legal issues around natural resources and address it appropriately. So this group also has a legal session that has been integrated into it to address the legal issues around gender in the space of our developmental process. Aside that, there is a gender support facility that has been introduced. And this facility is to enable women who are in nursing or maternity to still participate in meetings, because we believe that when a woman puts to bed, her biological role shouldn't prevent her from participating in meetings. So this project takes care of a nanny who comes together to the meeting with the mother to take care of the baby whilst this nursing mother is actively participating in the meeting. And so far, there's been remarkable achievements from the projects, and this includes the interest among the civil society organizations who are part of the legal working group meetings about gender issues. And so now we have gender disaggregated data, so that whilst we are implementing our programs, projects, and activities, we're able to find out how many women were there. That is representation. And based on the representation, we find out if they are adequately participating. If not, what are the challenges that is hampering their participation? Then these challenges are addressed appropriately. Apart from that, there was a resolution at one of the legal working group meetings that, based on the understanding of gender and what gender brings on board, if there is any position to be occupied by civil society, gender considerations are to be made. And I'm proud to say that because of this resolution, the civil society representative of the Cocoa and Forest Initiative in Ghana is a female, in the person of myself standing here. Aside that, this gender facility has also supported a number of women to participate who previously would have been staying at home taking care of their babies. But because of this support, they can come for legal working group meetings. Their babies are comfortably sleeping or resting with their nannies while they sit in the meetings, taking care of all the issues that we need to take care of at the natural resource level. To conclude, I would say that women have a very important role to play in natural resource management, but these roles cannot be adequately executed if they are not brought on board. There is therefore the need for gender representation, participation, as well as inclusion of the views that we bring on board. The VPA in Ghana has started well, and we need to tweak in a little gender mainstreaming to make it the best for others to take a cue from. Because we know that the VPA in Ghana, which seems to promote sustainable forest management, improve livelihood, equity, and enhance good governance, has direct relations with some of the SDGs. Talk about the SDG 1, 2, 3, 5, and 15. But this cannot be achieved when women are not brought on board. So what we are saying is that in your program, in your plans, in your projects, mainstream gender into it, and we, the women on board, will justify our inclusion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very nice. nice. I was always remember when I used to work in British government, the joke was once you mainstream gender, you know, the whole thing disappears and no one, and it doesn't make a difference. So I'm happy to see that mainstreaming in this case is actually a very proactive and very specific process in Ghana. Wonderful. So I now welcome Loretta Pope-Kai, who is from Liberia. She is the program director at the Foundation for Community Initiatives in Liberia. And she's also the national president and the West Africa regional vice president for the Young Women Network of ECOWAS. That's the Economic Community of West African States.
Thank you. And I'm humbled to present my article on land is power, how land rights can enfranchise Liberian women. So I did this article this year, and it was published on March 8th, International Women's Day. And as we all know, International Women's Day is a day set aside where women come together to talk on achievements and challenges overcome. So in 2018, our president, George Manuel, passed the new Land Rights Act that gave support to women's land rights. So I'm going to say a little bit about my institution and how we've been working to promote women's rights around forests and land. So the Foundation for Community Initiatives was established in 2004, and our key interest is to integrate women's leadership in community-driven initiatives around forest and land. The Land Rights Act is the most progressive land law in Liberia that supports women's land rights. Unlike before the passage of the Land Rights Act, we had a women inheritance law that supports only married women. And knowing very well that 62% of women in Liberia could not own land because they were unmarried women. And looking at the UNDP report, Liberia stands or ranked the 155th country over 160 when it comes to gender equality. So in practice, this means that unmarried women, who represent 62% of Liberian women, couldn't own land or have their own houses, and often they were referred to as squatters within their family land. These women are often unpaid laborers within their families, having to tend on the land and take care of relatives at the same time. Yet, they can't own land or make decisions of those very land that they stand on. So with the passage of this act, women are defined as part of their community, able to participate in land governance, decisions, and management bodies. And all women, whether you're married or not, you can own land privately, jointly, and collectively. So, 73%, looking at some of the challenges, 73% of Liberian women are illiterate. So it's a huge challenge that we need to work around. And we need to simplify most of these laws so that women themselves can understand, which is causing stigma, and it prevents them from being a community leader because they are illiterate. So the provision of the law says that Article 5 specifically speaks to ensuring community land management of customary land rights with equal representation of male, female, and youth. And women can own land single, jointly, and collectively. So, as a way of confidence building, looking at the picture displayed, I work with rural communities in conducting trainings, conducting dialogues, to build the self-esteem of women to come up to speak. Because the law supports you. It's one thing of crafting a law. The challenge around that is the implementation. So in order for women to participate, they have to be aware of the information. So at my institution, I conduct dialogue, I talk with women, and I educate women on the different laws. Thank you.
Simplification and communication. Very good. So now I'm hoping that Melania is speaking to us from Peru. She's online, so bienvenida, welcome. Aha, we can see you. Podemos verle. Ahorita, Melania, le voy a presentar en inglés, entonces, y te voy a indicar cuándo debes arrancar.
Ok, estoy atenta.
Your headset's channel 0, so Melania Canales Poma, from Peru, speaking from Peru. She is president of the National Organizations of Andean and Amazonian Women in Peru, ONAMIAP. She is a leader of the Quechua peoples, indigenous peoples, originally from the Lucanas community and district in Ayacucho region. She's been involved in community activism since a young woman. And in 2011, she was also mayor of Lucanas. Entonces, bienvenido a una audiencia de más o menos unos 100 personas y sigue adelante. Y cuando llegues, si pasas 10 minutos, yo le voy a indicar con voz alta. Sigue adelante.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Alin causa y cacho, la palayquichita, chay piliu taricoscunata. Bueno, he hecho un saludo en mi idioma original,
how we greet
que es
people
quechua.
in my
Soy
native
pueblo
language, in
indígena
Quechua.
Bien,
I represent the Quechua indigenous
soy
people.
la representante actual
I'm
de
the
la
representative,
Organización
the current
Nacional de Mujeres
representative
Indígenas,
of
Andinas y
Peru's
Amazónicas
National
del Perú.
Indigenous Women's Network.
Y esta organización,
And
tiene
this
un
organization
proceso aproximadamente de
has a
25
process
años, de
of
25
at
años
least
que
has been
venimos
going on for
ya
about
trabajando
25 years
por
that we
nuestros
have been
derechos
working
individuales y
for
colectivos
our
como
individual
mujeres
and
indígenas.
collective rights as indigenous
No ha
women.
sido nada fácil
It
conseguir
hasn't been an easy
autonomía
task.
porque ha habido mucha oposición de algunas
We have faced a lot of opposition from mixed
organizations,
organizations, even from the state itself.
But
But we, however, have continued to work to protect our rights as indigenous women. And as part of this process, ONAMIAP has worked on several areas with regards to participation, active participation when it comes to decision making. One inward and another outward towards the state. Inward among our own indigenous communities. With the organizations, especially communal organizations, mixed organizations, we have been participating in this. One of the things is in modifying the statutes, the national statutes, for us indigenous women to have a voice in our own communities.
en el mundo andino, sobre
because
todo, en el mundo
in
andino,
the region
las
of the
mujeres
Andes,
indígenas
women,
no son
indigenous
consideradas
women,
comuneras
are not
calificadas. Y
considered
como no son consideradas
equals.
comuneras calificadas,
And
ellas
since
no
they're not
pueden tener
considered
voz y
equal,
voto
they
y no pueden
cannot,
participar
they don't have a
activamente en
voice.
la
They
gestión
cannot
y
actively take
administración
part in the
del
management
territorio.
of the land and the
Y
territory.
nosotras hemos venido
And
trabajando
us, we
en
have
nuestras
been
propias
working
comunidades para
within our own
modificar
communities
el
to
estatuto,
modify
donde se
this
incorpore
statute
mínimamente
to
el
include at
30%,
least
¿no?
a
de
30%
género
requirement
en la
for
directiva
inclusion of the
comunal.
gender
30%
issue
en la directiva
in
comunal. No ha sido
communal
nada fácil.
management.
Algunas
This
comunidades
hasn't been
inclusive
easy.
no han querido
Some communities
esa
haven't been
modificación,
willing to
ese
do this,
cambio.
to push for this
Inclusive nos han sabido decir,
amendment.
bueno,
And
¿cómo
they
van a
have even
venir
told us,
ustedes
well, how do you dare come
cambiar
here to
nuestras
try to
formas de vida?
change the way in which we
Nosotros hemos
do
sabido decir,
live
bueno,
our lives?
también
And
en
we
las
have said, listen,
comunidades existe
we, as part
el
of the communities,
patriarcado
in the communities, we
ancestral.
have
El
ancestral
patriarcado
patriarchy.
Y con el patriarcado colonial,
And with
se ha
it, with
reforzado,
this
como se
colonial
dice, esta discriminación hacia las mujeres,
patriarchy,
sobre todo
there
hacia
has
las
been
mujeres
even more of a
indígenas.
discrimination
Y en
towards
ese
women,
sentido,
especially indigenous
hemos
women.
trabajado en las
And in this
comunidades,
way,
pero
we have
también
worked at community
hacia afuera
level,
hemos
but also
impulsado la
outward,
modificación de la ley de
pushing
comunidades
for the
campesinas,
amendment
donde se ha
of
logrado
a law
el
of
cambio
indigenous or peasant
cambio
communities, where
igual
we have
del
achieved
30%
a
de la
change,
cuota
or
de
what we
género,
asked for, this
de la
quota
cuota de
of at least a
género. Hoy por hoy, ya
30%
bueno,
of
solamente
gender
falta la firma del presidente de la
diversity.
República,
And now
porque
all
ya se
we're
aprobó
waiting for
en el
is the for the
Congreso. Y
signature of the
esto,
President
yo
of the
creo que es
Republic,
muy
because it
importante
has
este
been
logro
approved in
para
Parliament.
nosotras,
And I think this
las
is an
mujeres
important achievement for
indígenas.
us, indigenous women.
Asimismo,
In this
hemos
way,
venido participando
we have
activa y
also
efectivamente
participated
también
actively and
en los
effectively
procesos de titulación,
in
en los
the
procesos de titulación,
processes
ya que en el Perú
with
existe un proyecto grande de
of
catastro,
titling,
de
because there is a
titulación y
project
registro de tierras rurales,
in
que es
Peru when it
la
comes to
tercera
register of
etapa.
rural
En
lands,
esto
and it's on the
hemos
third
tratado de
phase.
incluir en
And
los
what we have tried to do is to
para levantar
include
información de
here
campo y
in
también
the
capacitación a los
procedures to
trabajadores
get
públicos.
information and
Doña Melania, ¿usted tiene una presentación que quiere mostrar en la pantalla o no?
No, solamente
Miss
ahí
Melania,
las
do you
fotos
have a
voy
presentation that
presentar
you'd
la
like to show
presentación.
on the screen? No, I haven't got a
Veo a
presentation.
usted pero no sé si quiere
Because the
también
thing is, we
compartir
can't
alguna
see
de
you,
las-
but I don't know if you would like to maybe share as well
algunos
the
trabajos que
PowerPoint
hemos venido
presentation
haciendo.
or
Ahí
some
vamos a
data.
hacer la
Yes,
presentación.
I'll try to share
Sí.
this with
Okay,
you.
yeah,
Here we
Makoto,
go.
sigue.
Claro. Bien. Entonces, como
Right.
lo venía
So we'll
diciendo, que
carry on.
nosotras,
As I was
las
saying,
mujeres indígenas
We,
organizadas
the
en
indigenous
ONAMIAP,
women,
venimos
have
participando
organized as
activamente
part of
también
ONAMIAP. We have
en
been
lo que es la
actively
levantación de
participating
información de campo y
in
la capacitación a los
this
trabajadores
information gathering,
públicos, que en este caso
and
Ministerio de
in this
Agricultura,
case,
para
also
que
the
ellos
collaboration
puedan
from the
también
Ministry of
incorporar
Agriculture,
el
so that
enfoque de
they
género,
can
el enfoque de género.
integrate, they can mainstream
Ya que las
gender
mujeres
in their
mujeres
procedures.
indígenas necesitamos
Because indigenous
estar
women, we need
activamente involucrada en los
play
procesos de
an active
titulación
part
de
in
tierra
the
y
provision
la
of
resolución
titles,
también de
land
conflictos,
titles,
ya que
and also
hay
in conflict
muchos
resolution,
conflictos
because
en
there
el
are
tema de
many
linderos y
conflicts
también el no reconocimiento de
around
parte
borders
del Estado.
and the lack of
Ese es un
recognition
tema
from the state.
grandemente que venimos trabajando.
This is a
Asimismo,
project
venimos
that we have
participando en la
leading.
Comisión
We have
Nacional
also
de Cambio
participated in the
Climático
National
para
Commission
hacer
for Climate
seguimiento a
Change
las
so that we can
contribuciones
follow
nacionalmente
the
determinadas.
national guidelines.
Entonces, yo creo que
And I
este
believe
es otro espacio
that
donde
this
nosotros
is
hemos podido
another space where we have been able
y trabajar
to participate and
activamente.
to work
Asimismo,
in an active
el
manner.
El
The
subcomité para las
subcommittee
salvaguardas de la implementación
for
del
the
RED+.
safeguards and implementation of RED+.
Del RED+. Venimos participando
We
actualmente en los
have
procesos
been
de
working,
consulta
we're
previa
currently
de la
working in the
reglamentación
consultation,
de la
in
ley
the prior
marco de
consultation
cambio
processes.
climático. Yo sé que no es nada
And
fácil
I know that it is not easy because the issue of climate change affects specifically the indigenous peoples, our communities, our territories, the loss of biodiversity. But the state often has its own alliances with extractive industries. And these laws and the framework law for climate change is not easy for it to be approved by indigenous peoples. However, we're still working on trying to include 11 items here, 11 proposals, and one of these involves the mainstreaming of gender, the active participation and effective participation of women, because we, us women, indigenous women, have been sharing from one generation to the next, passing on our knowledge, our ancestral knowledge, in terms of taking care of biodiversity, taking care of seeds, and also of medicine. The knowledge we have around medicinal plants for us is very important to be able to take part in these processes. In this consultation, prior consultation process as part of the framework law for climate change. In this way, us, the indigenous women, going inward towards our communities, we are working to increase the visibility of, especially of these proposals. Well.
Bien, entonces yo creo que
right.
Bueno, no sé, creo que he hablado muy rápido.
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm talking too fast or for too long. No, you still have another 30 seconds.
A veces es difícil, ¿no? Pero, en fin.
It's sometimes hard to judge what to say when presented with these opportunities. But what I want to say is that women, we still have a lot of work to do. And as part of this work, well, we have working towards our communities, but then also work outward towards the state. In our communities, the indigenous women, we also suffer discrimination. We are also ignored, and we have been working to increase our visibility inward and outward, because sometimes the state doesn't want us first, doesn't want for us to have any visibility. We're being stigmatized, we're being discriminated against, and this is still seen on the media. This is still seen that there's no rules or regulations that support women. And in this regard, we're still working and being organized as part of ONAMIAP.
Many thanks, Melania. It was very interesting. We've heard something about work inside and outside, and also the importance of prior consultation.
So, welcome to you all, Doña Melania in Peru, Loretta, Doreen, and Claire. So before we open the discussion to all of you, I have some, oh, we have very nice. Okay. Great. Yeah, some sort of questions, because and my question to you. So I'll start with Claire. You talked about this very low number, very few of the laws, regulations linked to land and forests actually protect women's international rights to vote, to lead within local up to national level, in local level as well as national level governance bodies. And I just wondered whether you had any concrete examples of where, by changing things at local level, you actually also increase women's democratic participation at national level, which then has or subnational level in local governments that then has implications for the whole of how forests might be perceived nationally?
Yeah, a great example of that comes from Nepal with FECOFUN, which is a federation of community users. And it's a very large organization in Nepal representing 90,000 members. But so they advocate for community forests, and they did a lot of those also those initiatives to raise awareness and increase women's participation at the local level, and also at the national level. They did a campaign that had to revise their constitution, the constitution of FECOFUN. And that took 15 years of advocacy, and at the end, they achieved to get 50% of executive leaders that were women. And that really led this new generation of women. In the last local election in 2017, there were 2,000 community members that were supporting by FECOFUN that won, and of those 2,000, over 600 people, women, were elected, so that's lovely.
So from forest community governance, we're getting broader participation of women in local level elections and broader elections. Just to say, I was very shocked when I went to the US to discover how many, what percentage of women are actually in the US Congress. It's doesn't look good. So it's not just, even in a very powerful country, women's participation is not so good. I have a sort of question for you, Doreen, in Ghana. You talk about how Ghana in the VPA has really been very proactive in trying to get women in there, and the concrete example of having nannies and so that women can come with their children and to participate. What other barriers do you see at local level for women to be able to be active? And do you think it's going to make any difference actually to the regulations if women come in and to the rules which govern the way forests are used and managed? How do you see that in the sort of concretely in the VPA? Why should we be worried about this in the VPA process?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. And like I said, women have different roles to play in the VPA process. But at the community level, women are virtually pushed away because the forestry sector in Ghana is seen to be more of a man's world. And so it's reserved for the men. Even in the government sector, the formal sector where we have elites, educated women, the numbers are not so encouraging. For instance, some statistic that was picked around 2015, 2016, we had 7% of women and the management level at the Forestry Commission, which is the government sector. Yes. And the entire women folk within the commission itself was just about 12%. And this same trend is seen when you go to the community level, and sometimes it's even worse. Recently, I was conducting a research on how women are being involved in community forest monitoring. And I realized that these women were not coming on board because of, number one, education. The women at that level are not well educated. Most of them haven't been to school at all. So they think they wouldn't want to come up and embarrass themselves by not knowing what to do. So that's pushed them away. That's the first thing. Then again, the sociocultural and religious issues. You go down there, and we're discussing it this afternoon. It is believed that the man is the head of the home. And so when the man participates in the meeting, it means the entire household has been part of the meeting. So the woman, you sit at home and let me go and listen to what is happening, then I'll come back and tell you. Forgetting that when the man comes in there, he comes as a man and may not be able to bring out the perspective of the woman on board. So these are some of the things that we are trying to let them know that allow the women also to participate. And sometimes I met one lady in a community and said, the men wouldn't allow us to come. Why wouldn't they say, no, stay at home? This is a man's field. It is for the men. But I believe if we allow them to come on board, it's going to change things. Because as such now, the few who are on board, one woman told me particularly, Madam, now that I know it is good to be part of this thing, I will let my child go to school. Because I've realized because I didn't go to school, it was a hindrance to me. But I believe she'll be better off if she's in school. So educating the girl child is one way of getting people involved in the decision-making process, right from the community level to the national level. And by so doing, they can be assertive, they can participate effectively, and change the dynamics around the forestry sector. And when they are informed and better equipped with the skills, they can all come on board, support the men who are already there to manage the forest better for us all.
That's very interesting. I mean, I was thinking that I went out to visit a community in Mexico last year. And so we stood in the forest, and I mean, it's quite valuable pine forest there. So we were talking about the timber, and there were only 2 women there. And I was talking to her about her clothes and asking her, and we suddenly discovered, well, I suddenly discovered, and then we discussed it, that actually the most valuable product in that forest was not the timber. There was lichen on the bark of the trees, which was used to dye the woolen clothes, and those woolen clothes were more valuable than the timber and what was being exported down to the city, right? Or, you know, so it has all kinds of implications, lack of participation, and I felt bad in that group that I hadn't actually made an effort to say, you know, stop talking, let's have a discussion about what women are getting out of this forest. I should have been proactive and more sensitive to the reason why she and I were having a side conversation while the main group was having some other conversation, which was the important one. So that was my, you know, even as a woman, I was not sensitive to a gender issue. So that's very interesting what you're saying. Loretta, I'm very interested to hear in Liberia. I mean, this is obviously quite a complex situation, and you know, you talk about the illiteracy and that Liberia is quite low down on the gender scorecard. And listening to Doña Melania, who talked about the 30% quorum, I mean, has Liberia put in place any laws which mandate participation of women in assemblies, local level government structures, or in the forest sector specifically? I mean, how do you see that?
Thank you. So currently we have a bill, the Gender Parity Bill, which is still with our legislators, and women are advocating for the passage of that bill. And because of the strong patriarchal system that we have, men don't want to support that bill. That bill is calling for 50-50 participation of women and men into political, social, and economic activities. And even currently, we also have a bill for political parties. Not less than 30 or 70% on your party should be women. So we still have that bill with the National Election Commission, and we stay struggling on it so that it can become a law. Okay, so when it comes to the forestry sector, we have laws. We have the National Forestry Reform Laws, and we also have regulations that around the community rights law. Looking at the regulation call for inclusive participation. But because of the legal terminology, it's affecting the participation of women at the community level. For example, looking at the governance structure is calling for at least one woman participation. So that legal terminology, at least, is affecting women's participation. So if you look at on the governance structure around community forestry bodies, you will find one woman on each of these bodies. That is, the law say at least one woman. Not knowing very well that at least can be more than one. So, and look at some of the roles these women are playing in these different structures. They are chaplains, they are treasurers. They don't have meaningful participation, even though we have the law, but the interpretation of those laws are affecting our rural communities. That's why we need legal in Liberia, and also the Heritage Partners Associates. My institution is working with them to bring women from around the forestry communities so that we can educate them around the laws. The laws are there, but the interpretation of those laws are affecting women's participation. So we need our legal experts to come and educate our women, even the men, on the interpretation, because the men are the ones interpreting those laws for the women. So if you tell the women say at least one participation, okay, they will send one participation. How are they participating? So they are part of the governance structure, and so what? What are they bringing to the table? So one thing, the interpretation of the law limits the participation, and who are interpreting those laws are men. So we are working with our legal practitioners to explain those laws and give clearly those legal terminology in the laws, the meaning to increase women's participation in forest and land governance.
Very interesting, yes. And so last week I was actually, or some of us were in the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and there's a big discussion about you know, the revenue transparency and disclosure of data. So it's all around open data, or in this case, improving laws and those laws being open. But one thing is how they are understood and how they're interpreted and how they're framed down at citizen level, and what citizens and women citizens need to know to be able to participate. I think the other thing I was interested is, and I'd like to ask Doña Melania, right? Entonces voy a preguntar en español.
I'm going to ask this question in Spanish.
Entonces se va a traducir a Doña Melania. Entonces, Doña
Melania,
usted ha mencionado
you've mentioned that, unlike in Liberia, where the law says at least one woman should take part in the assemblies and the governance meetings, and you were talking about this law that has been approved by the parliament, that you should have at least a 30%. But we know when it comes to implementing this is an obstacle, and that in many parts of Latin America, the communities and rural communities are very far away from each other and from the center where the communities would meet, near the football ground or the communal house. And many times they have to walk for a long, long time to take part. And I have also seen that in many communities in Latin America, that only men have mobile phones, that sometimes the mobile phones don't work. Which are the obstacles that in practice stop women from rural and indigenous communities from participating? And what have you seen as concrete examples on how women, how you've been able to implement equity measures, gender equality measures? Right. With regard to this, I'd like to say that I think it is very important, and one of the things that we've learned is the importance of being organized. And by this, in the organization, we support one another. What we do as well is empower women and to inform them about their rights to our sisters, because one of the main obstacles is to have a voice. We have had this experience. Our sisters who live in the communities, they sometimes are fearful of speaking out, and we have gone down to the communities. We have gone to far away places to do capacity building exercises, to inform them, to empower them, and in this way our sisters have access to the information, and in this way they can raise their voice and to say to their sisters, well, stop being afraid, because our rights are more important than anything. And I think this has been an obstacle, the lack of information. And also, we know that our people, for them, education, they don't have access to education. There are many sisters that are not able to read or write, and even up to now, in some communities, this is the case. And we organize workshops, but then workshops that are linked to their realities. So we ask them to do drawings or organize games, and this is something that we've done, trying to teach them. And I also know that there is another barrier, there is the workload. Because imagine our sister that has to work, do the housework, she has to produce, she has to be in public spaces. This is not an easy task. However, we have also been talking to our brothers to tell them, brothers, we need your help, your support, and for you to be responsible. Because beyond your help and support, no, it's your responsibility to share the load with housework, with the children. This is a responsibility. But it's been hard work. It's going to be a long road. And we still have a lot to do in this regard to make our brothers understand. But we have been working on this. This is another key area for us. In this way as well, towards the state, so that they implement policies, whether we're talking about local, regional government or national government, they have to introduce policies that include this issue of gender, the mainstreaming of gender. Because in some communities, less than 3%, fewer than 3% are women who are leading the communities, these peasant or native communities in Peru. And in this way, within mixed organizations, it always tends to be men who lead these organizations. So we need public policies that regulate the women's participation and that would allow for us to be more active. And we have been working towards this. It's very, very important for us to get organized. And on AMIAP, we work with a collective approach rather than at the individual level. It's at a collective level.
And so with that, I think I will open to the floor. I mean, I'm very interested, and we also have donors here. As a donor ourselves, we actually have we ask all the organizations that we give grants to consider proactively in their proposals how they're going to promote leadership of women through, in fact, young women through to old. So I think sort of being very proactive given some of the barriers that we have to overcome. So I can see my colleague, so the gentleman over there at the back, and then the gentleman to his right, and then another gentleman and over here. So starting here.
Yeah, hi, this is Kevin Curry from the Climate and Land Use Alliance. A question for Loretta. I mean, we often hear people discussing gender and youth as kind of one broad category. But I'm curious how you see the intersection of those two issues. And one thing that I've always thought is that the faster we can help accelerate a transition to a kind of next generation of younger leadership, the better off we'll be from the perspective of having people in positions of power who are more gender sensitive, whether that's women or men. But I'm curious how you see that, how you see the attitudes of the kind of next emerging generation of leaders on gender issues.
Take various questions, so that's the first question. Yes, next.
So I'm Steve Ree, and I work with Kevin at Ford Foundation and CLUA, and I'm older than Kevin, but I won't take that comment personally, Kevin. Just kidding. No, but I was just looking at the sort of description of this session, and it says in it that we'll discuss the role of the international community in advancing women's rights. So I really appreciated all of your presentations, and it would be great to hear from you, specifically based on your individual experiences, how the international community, and if you could be specific about, who in that big giant bucket could actually support your individual efforts. And it could be that the international community, it's best for your struggle and for what you're doing for the international community to not be involved at all. Because sometimes they create more problems than anything else. So just be good to hear about that.
Okay. There was a gentleman over here. Yes, that's right. And then the lady at the front, then the lady at the back.
Hi, I'm Chris Chapman from Amnesty International. I had a question for Doña Melania. I just wanted to ask a question about the power relationships, the gender relationships within indigenous communities. I think, well, for a start, the one important thing is to not allow governments to use that as a means of denying indigenous peoples their right to self-determination and sovereignty. Obviously, what is needed is working with indigenous peoples, if those gender imbalances exist, to empower indigenous women within those communities. But I had a specific question to Doña Melania, if she had specific concrete suggestions for how external actors could help with free, prior, and informed consent processes, because sometimes those processes, as you know, the government is meant to be, or whichever third party it is meant to be engaging with the indigenous people's own decision-making structures. Sometimes those gender power relationships are part of those structures. What can external actors do to try to make sure that women's voices and other sectors of the community, young people, older people, LGBTI people, are able to participate in those free, prior, and informed consent processes?
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll be translating that question to Melania because she actually can't hear the translation back. So just to be aware, if you're asking Melania, keep it quite tight and remind me if I translate to her incorrectly. So we're taking one and then another, and then we'll come back to our colleagues. Yeah.
Thank you, Penny, and I want to thank and congratulate all the presenters for the quality of the information, the rich and diverse experience shared here. My question now is to Doreen. You do a very great job with CSO at the basis, but I want to know what is done with policymakers to enhance gender mainstreaming in VPA process.
And one more at the back here, yes, in the dark red, yeah. And then,
thank you very much.
Come back, and then 1 and 2, yeah.
And thank you for the presentations. And for Doreen, we are all coming from Ghana, so I think that when we get back, there's a lot of learning that the FLECT VPA process can learn from the RED process on how we have mainstreamed and incorporated gender into our implementation processes. But I've just been thinking, and this is something that goes a long way back, as I was also involved in gender work some time ago, about how we change really the narrative, or we don't change, but we complement the narrative in promoting the gender work. So if anybody walks in here and sees an all-male panel, or if 10 people walk in here, probably 2 of them might raise eyebrows. But when they see an all-female panel, I'm sure that almost all of them might raise eyebrows. So my thinking is, in the work that you have been doing, to all of you, anybody can answer this, have you really assessed the power of using male champions to propagate the gender message? Because it's not really about seeing a woman there all the time. And I go back to Penny's situation that she gave. She was there as a woman, but she was not even, in her own words, sensitive to what it really was that the woman wanted from the forest. So I think that we should be able to empower the men to understand why we should have the women in these discussions. And we can have a man there who can truly represent the views of the woman, even if the woman is not there. Because I think that there's going to be a long time for us to really see this convergence coming into play and having really that equal representation that we want. But within that space, can we have male champions who also propagate this message? And what are your reflections on this? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you each the questions. I'll remind you what the question is, and forgive me, I think I will translate each question so Melania can hear them. Entonces, doña Melania, le voy a traducir cada pregunta.
Will translate each question, but don't start answering because we'll let the ladies here answer first.
Loretta, there was a question to you about next generation and youth. So not just young women, but also young men. Is it true that by working with youth you might get a new generation that is more gender sensitive? Doña Melania, estoy diciendo, una pregunta a Loretta era, ¿será que la nueva
The question to Loretta is it the new generation, the younger ones, whether they're men or women, as they are growing and becoming leaders, will they be more sensitive when it comes to gender issues or not?
Loretta, please.
Thank you. So the first question around gender and youth and how we see the next generation. We are separating gender and youth because women and youth are the most marginalized group. So all of our work that we do are focused on women and youth. And even amongst the youth, we are focused on young women and young men. So they are unique to our work because they have been marginalized. Look at the gap. There are wide gaps when it comes to youth participation, when it comes to women representation. So our work, we promote, we work with men, but our key interest is for men to promote women's rights. Because we know men have the information, men have the access to the information, but women don't have the access to information. The youth don't have the access to information. So even our work with men, we still have our objectives that men will promote the interests of women. And then coming from my individual experience on international support, and I can see myself as an example, sitting down here, being supported by a friend, David, and we can also recognize the work of Client F, working with us as the direct beneficiaries from the communities. Because we work with the communities, we are able to translate the different laws. But Client F work through civil society so that civil society can be able to work with the communities. Friend work through civil society so that civil society can be able to work with the communities. So working with the communities, looking at the different gap when it comes to forest governance, when it comes to land governance, women are just sitting on the table. And so they are sitting on the table, and so what? We are looking for meaningful participation. So in order for women and youth to participate meaningfully, they need the information. So how do we give them the information? It's through simplification, because you need to take your time so that they will be able to understand the different laws and the benefits it brings. So we work with women, we work with youth, but we also work with men. But working with men, our key interest is for men to work with women so that they can support women when it comes to forest governance and land. And using men as male champions. Yes, we have male champions in the communities. They are there advocating and pushing for women meaningful participation. And they are also working with the different traditional leaders, because we know in the communities we have barriers of our traditional leaders that affect women's representation. In our community, women don't sit among our traditional leaders to discuss. They have the fear that sitting amongst them, they won't be able to speak the way they should speak. So we work with men separately, we work with women separately, and at the end of the day, the two of them will be able to sit together to have the issues discussed together.
Entonces now,
I'm now going to interpret the question to Melania, and then I'm going to go back to the question to Doreen. Melania, there's a question from the gentleman from Amnesty International, and the question is, is the government or the state using this discrimination within communities, discrimination of indigenous men against indigenous women? Is there a risk that this is used in order to inhibit wider self-determination and recognition of rights efforts? The question is, do you have specific examples where the right to consent, to free, previous and informed consent has worked well for indigenous women?
Bien, primeramente voy a empezar
right.
con la última
First
pregunta
of all,
de la consulta
I'm going to start
previa.
with the last question, the prior consent. In our organization, we are very critical with regards to prior consultation. We know there is a prior consultation law in Peru. However, this does not comply with international standards. There are many rights that are missing. For example, with decision-making, at the end of the consultation, it's the state that makes the decision. When it comes to women, there's still this active participation of women within communities. This is missing. At national level, consultations that have been carried out, women's associations, such as ours, has been actively participating. However, this is still missing in communities. We have had an almost invisible participation of women there. With regards to the other issue, you asked me, Penny, what were you asking me about? Whether the stereotype of an indigenous man discriminating, though there is a male chauvinistic, does the government use this to weaken the indigenous movement in itself? Is there a risk or not? Yes, this has happened in some spaces where we have participated, that the state itself makes the indigenous population groups face indigenous women. They start saying, oh, indigenous women are separating themselves, working separately, and the state is saying, I can't go to the community and ask women to participate as well, because these communities are independent. This is one of the versions that we have heard about, and this is the reason why we try to have rules that can be implemented when it comes to the gender approach. But there is another question that I have heard about it at work, to whether men are also allies when it comes to representing women. Yes, one of the things is that men are always allies, but as long as they comply with their responsibility raising children and at work, at home, not to replace women's voice, not to represent women, because we have our own way of feeling and our own way of thinking, our own outlook on things. And this is one thing that we still have to do more work on, for women to be empowered and be able to make our own decisions without any influence whatsoever. When it comes to new generations are more gender sensitive, but there is hard work there. I'm not sure if this happens in other countries, but in Peru, the religious fundamentalism has made great progress, and this new generation is also facing this. This religious fundamentalism, this conservatism that is discriminatory, this is what we can see in communities, and this is affecting and promoting inequality between men and women within the genders. I think this is an issue that we should start debating. These religious fundamentalists are prohibiting our knowledge, our activities, our way of looking at the world. They say, no, that's a sin, that's the devil. And I think these are the sort of things we should start debating too.
And I'm reminded with those words, I mean, I think it's very interesting, the Rainforest the Interfaith Initiative has been mobilizing itself to try and have discussions about what it means for forests, what different faith organizations at local as well as international level, how they engage with forests and forest peoples, and some of the kind of pros and cons of different faith organizations out in some of these remoter forest areas. Before moving to Doreen, I just wanted to ask Claire whether you had any comments on the question about FPIC, free, prior and informed consent, which seems to me at the heart of getting, it's not just about information, it's about information that you get it sufficiently in advance and in the right form, and that there's no coercion involved in the way you engage with that information. Do you have any views on this?
Yeah, well, our research really shows, and what we just heard from the other panelists, is that it's very hard for women, because of their low governance rights, to fully participate in those decisions and be informed, because they're not in those governance making bodies. And also, it's even worse than that, they're not necessarily recognized as members of their communities. So what our research shows is that of the 80 community-based tenure regimes that we looked at, only 29% recognize women as equal members. So in that situation, there's not informed, clearly. They're not part of those discussions. But just to say that what we looked at in our study really is what's in the law, and it might be different from what is from actual practices in the community. So we do see positive examples in a few. With communities that, especially in Asia, that would ask for all adults to consent and to have a consensus base when the law would just require a majority voting, for example.
Right. So, Doreen, there was a question.
3 questions.
Yes, and then in particular about policy, how really are policymakers in the VPA process changing and taking things on board? I mean, obviously, there's male champions, youth, and the international community.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll start with the international community. Most of the projects that we are implementing back at home, talk of the forestry sector, the health sector, and what have you, are supported with funds from development partners. So right now we could talk of DFID supporting this process. I think I left my last slide out, but that was actually an acknowledgement to DFID for supporting the process or the intervention that I spoke of. And so we have DFID supporting some of our interventions. We have the EU also supporting some of the projects back in Ghana. And we also have in Troppenbos, for instance, we have the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs also supporting some of our activities. And all these activities have been brought down to us, and there are international legal frameworks that have been set for gender mainstreaming. And so it is up to us down there who are implementing the activities to make sure that whatever template has been given to us is put into action. Because they will not force you to say, put this there or that's there. It is up to you to translate whatever has been given to you and make it fit into the context that we are working in. And so, for instance, the projects under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they've also been linking up with other partners in the US who are also gender-focused. And so now we are looking at not just gender, but youth as well. So now the data that we are picking from the field for meetings and others have special emphasis on gender and youth. We want to see how many people are participating who are females and how many who are within the youth brackets. And based on that, we're able to see the trends, analyze them, and see do we have a future adult in terms of whatever project we are implementing. So that is being catered for in one way or the other. Then on the issue of policy makers, just like the development partners, we have the gender policy, the national gender policy that has been there since 2004. and it was even reviewed in 2015 to incorporate other issues of safeguards. And so these documents are there. But the question is, to what extent are we implementing those documents? Our policies are just statements of intent. It's up to you to materialize it. So if the document is there and you do not put it into action, it's just sitting there on the cabinet or on your desktop as a soft copy version. You have to set it into motion. And it's up to us, the practitioners, to really see what is in there and how we can materialize that in our context. So I would say that has been adequately catered for. We have to make it work. Then on the use of males as champions, yes, we are doing that. And I remember when it was time for the voting to this Cocoa and Forest Initiative, it was actually the men who championed my going there, because they understood why there is a need for a woman to be up there. And they went out campaigning, because the contest was for a number of people. And at the end of it all, I was voted. It was led by the men, because they understand the concept. And at the community level, back to the research that I'm undertaking, I asked some of the men, what is the added value of having women on the community monitoring committee? And I had a couple of them from different communities giving very interesting revelations that I had not even thought of. One of them said, excuse my language, please. He said, women are gossips. And by that, they can spread information very well. So when women are able to get the information and understanding about the flex implementation process, they can share a lot more than the men can do. And for me, that was a good attribute that women can be used for. That is a very key role that women can play in the VPA process. And that was being given by a man. So it means they have understood why women need to be on board. Aside that, they said women can really persuade and influence decisions and behavioral change without confrontation. I'm quoting they mention it in our local language, but that is what it means. So it's like when people are doing the wrong thing, when there are illegalities in the community and you want it to stop, it's better to let the woman champion it. And this is something that the men have realized, and so they are pushing the women to lead. So it is not the women who are saying, give us the space to operate. It's rather the men who have seen the roles that the women can play and supporting them to lead the process to cause that behavioral change that they are looking for. And so I remember in one of our communities some time ago, we were looking at this illegalities, and there were a number of women led by one particular older woman, elderly women. He went back into their community and said, okay, we've learned about illegal activities because of a training on VPA processes. So there were a number of illegal, or call them chainsaw operators in their community. She went there and told them, look, we've learned what you are doing is illegal. You are destroying our forest, so we want you to leave this, our community, for us. Just like that, simple persuasion, no fight, no confrontation. And truly, these guys left the forest reserve for them. And based on this achievement, there's been some donor support to some of these communities, and that community is now becoming a tourist attraction. It's called Breku Ebonko. Claire has been there before, and she attests to this fact. Aside that, they said women are always at home by virtue of the activities. And so they can really see who comes into the community, what is happening around, and can be very good informants. And all these things that I'm bringing out are the views and opinions that the men are bringing on board. It's because they've understood the role that women can play. And they are rather champion, they are rather pushing the women. Because of this and that competencies that you have come on board, and we can support the process. So I believe even at the community level, we have men champions who are leading the VPA process. And it's a very good thing that is happening over there. And there was one last, I think it's an add-up from Rosalind. Yes, we really appreciate what the Red Plus Secretariat is doing with respect to gender mainstreaming. But on the lighter notes, I believe they are just your next door neighbors. So when you go back home, just share the good news with them and let them take it up. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, we've got a question, and a new round of question here, and then Doña Norma. And a question over there. Okay, starting here. A microphone.
Oh, sorry.
And say who you are.
Ruth Madison, freelance. Thank you all for really interesting talks. And I wanted to flag up an issue. The focus of this meeting has been very much on the value of timber and also a little bit on wildlife this morning. But in your talks and in the discussions, there have been other values associated with forests that have been flagged up, which are particularly important for women. So what I used to be referred to as non-timber forest products. So things to do with medicine, dyes, food, but also more fundamental things like water. And I wondered whether the panel here could make any suggestions of how you as women, but also as people in general, we can flag up these very important values of forests that seem to often be forgotten, and flag them up to policymakers, because I believe this is an extremely important role to play now. Thank you.
Okay, another question here, Doña Norma.
A las compañeras, felicidades. Yo sé que están haciendo un gran trabajo en
many congratulations.
Okay, sigue.
Okay. Congratulations, colleagues, and for the great work that you are doing in your organizations. I have to make some comments. Some of the comments worry me when you say it's men who are working and they are providing our voice. I feel identified. When I went to the assembly where I was elected, it was a man who pushed forward my proposal because he thought he was going to use me. And he thought, she's going to be the face, but I will be the one in charge. When I was trained and took away the power that he had through the knowledge, and now he's my worst enemy. So you have to be careful with that. Who are we going to delegate the representation of our word? What do we want? How do you see yourselves as women defending those spaces and looking for those spaces, for those decision-making spaces? It's for us to still occupy those spaces so we can you can still be vigilant and we can still provide this information. I think we still have to have some ideas about how to support our women so we can reach those decision-making spaces, like things like what do we want to do with our resources. We are currently working with indigenous people in Dulce Nombre de Pulpí, which you're aware of, Penny. We are there working with the pest people, and it's hard work what you have to do there because the leaders there are men. And the ones who are producing are the women, but the men are the ones who are deciding when to sell the products, how we're going to pay it. Why, when it's the women who are producing? I think we've got to be careful here and need to have a very clear vision of where we want to be as women. How do we want our daughters to be in the future? And how are we going to take them with that knowledge in order to be able to take those power spaces? So I'd like to hear what your initiatives or suggestions are to apply in your places. I would also like to say, as a cooperative sector, that we have had some achievements. We have the Cooperative Act, which mandates 30% participation, and we've also had some influence within the Constitution, but we're also becoming visible in that space. We don't want that 30% of women to go there. We don't want them to be used. We want them to have the knowledge in order to occupy that space. This is a problem because men want still to use them. Possibly not all of them, but some still think I can dominate her and I can speak on her behalf. So be careful.
Okay, hold your response to that. We've got a question. The gentleman here, yes?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Mohamed Kabab, Climate International from Sierra Leone. I have a question for Doreen. what approach have you been using in terms of advocacy within the rural women? Of course, you and I know the Africa setting we're coming from. Before you meet the people, you have to go through some structures like the traditional religious leaders, the TRL. How informed the traditional leaders are about the VPA and the gender mainstreaming advocacy? How informed are they? Because we know in terms of advocacy at that level, it's difficult for communication to be channeled. Like, for example, our organization, we are doing a lot of advocacy, and so when we normally go to those communities, if we go directly to the people and start talking, engaging them in discussion, it will be fruitful, fruitless. You understand? So there is a structure in the rural setting. So how involved is the traditional religious leaders? And also take into consideration that in Africa setting, women are almost doing everything in our homes, from farming and charcoal mining, illegal logging for their housing construction and what have you. So what are the strategies do you think we can able to educate this woman? We know you mentioned percentage that these women are illiterate. What are the strategies do you think we can use in terms of informing and educating these women?
Okay, so are there one more question? And then we're coming back for a last round before we go to the lottery to see the prize winner. Okay, one more question here.
Afternoon, my name's Fiera Lezhniewska. It struck me that the conversation's been a bit essentialist about gender and women. In particularly, for an example, with the Liberia, Sirleaf Johnson really didn't respect women in communities with some of her initiatives to expand plantations for palm oil. And I think there needs to be a recognition that there's differences between women, there's conflicts between women, power inequities between women, and these are played out every single day, and they're very much they have to be part of the discourse, and it's important not to simply go men and women, and in a very essentialist manner, and I just throw that out there, yeah, and you can respond probably if you thanks.
Okay. So we'll go one more round. If I perhaps start, and then I'll end up with Doña Melania. So I'll just give the questions. So we had one question, which was about in this process, are women or can we, working with a gender lens, flag the non-timber values of forests, for example, medicines and women and water to policymakers? That's one question. The other question was, are male champions really champions, and to what extent are there, male-women politics? Put up your woman leader, and then I kind of control her, and how to handle that. And also there was a question about what happens when women produce and it's actually then men who control the prices, the sales. So actually an economic, not just a rights-based issue about imbalance. Another question about really how aware are traditional and religious leaders about the importance of gender, and indeed about the VPA itself. And then finally, is this a sort of slightly naive, essentialist discussion? Do women like Margaret Thatcher, no, sorry, not Margaret Thatcher, Sirleaf Johnson, sorry, that's an old joke. But, when women get into power or become professional or whatever, do we actually lose our gender sensitivity and also become gender blind? And this isn't just about gender politics, it's actually about power structures regardless of whether you're male and female, right? So those are complicated questions. So I'll give each of you kind of like 1 sort of minute. You don't have to answer all of that. And I will start with Loretta, then Doreen, then Claire. Entonces Loretta, Doreen, Claire, y luego a usted, doña Melania.
And then you, Melania, you will finish this round of Q&A before our game. Melania, you cannot win the game because you're not here.
Bueno, no hay problema. Lo único I will address the question of women using different non-timber forest products, the impact. Looking at the community rights law, it calls for 3 C's: commercial, community, and conservation. So women are interested in community, but men are interested in commercial and conservation. Women are also interested in conservation. So women promote community ownership around forestry because they go into the forest for non-timber forest products. Like we're talking about medicinal plants, we're talking about the tie and dye, and we're also talking about women using the forest in a sustainable way. We have some women in our community that is now doing honeybee keeping, and now they are now processing into different materials. We have soap making from the honey, we have juices, and we also have different materials that women will want to use from the forest. But unlike men, I'm not against men, but I want to provide the space for women, especially to be elevated to the highest decision level that we can now stand on our own to make decisions and informed decision. So men will quickly go into commercial, quick money. So if you look at most of our community forest that we have now, the community forestry management bodies, they are now being affected from third parties agreements. And who go into those agreements are men, with all the consent of women. Women are not aware when those meetings are held. Women are not informed because they want to make quick decisions about how to manage the forest. So women will be interested in community and conservation to save some of our primary forests so that they can have enough NTFP for future purposes. And we also want to save some for the community so that women themselves can manage and control the forest. And then I'll also speak to the last question on our former president, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She promoted women's leadership. She promoted women's empowerment. And she also opened a corridor that women could speak and be represented and be heard. But based on the patriarchal system that we have, limits us from doing what our former president wanted for women to do and the level in which she wanted women to reach. So currently, we have laws with our legislators that were brought forth by our former president, and now it's still stuck up in there amongst men who are making decisions whether to pass those laws or not. And even before she could leave or transition her power to the current president, she had to come up with a bill, a 1-year executive order on the domestic violence bill to eliminate all forms of violence against women. And one of those sections in the bill were calling against zero tolerance against female genital mutilation or cutting. So when Judge Rhee when President George Weah came to power, the one year executive order expires this year, February, and now he has not renewed that executive order. Currently, the bill has been passed in the absence of Section 16, which talks about female genital mutilation. And because they feel that the traditional people have the power, so they don't want to affect something that will enable these men from gaining power again. Because they are all men being elected into the House, so they don't want to pass the FGM bill that will cause the traditional people to hate them. So our former president, she gave rights to women, and because of those rights, we are one of the beneficiaries of those rights today. And because of her, we can speak anywhere. We are not limited to participate.
And I think one of the lessons from that is that if you're worried about palm oil or other activities, and you need to generate alliances with those who are moving and are in power, and so you may have champions on one issue, women's issues, who maybe find it less easy to handle how will palm oil plantations actually benefit women or not. So that's I think a lesson to us of how we play again across alliances, and environment movement needs to link up with the sort of women's movement in many different levels.
Okay, so I'll start with a question on how women are protecting the space. Yes, sometimes it's quite tricky when the men want to champion and push you in there. There could be something behind the mind of going to put you there, your face is being seen, but they are really the power behind it. And so what I always say is that get yourself there and build yourself up. It's about competency. If you are standing or sitting in there and you don't know what you are about, that is where they'll use you as a dummy and be pushing you around. But if you are there and you know what you are made of and what you can do, and you build yourself up, then you are there as yourself and represent the constituency that has put you there to represent. You become competent enough, you fill the space adequately, and by so doing, nobody can sit around because you've already occupied the space. That is it. Then on the community level, yes, our approach has been diverse. We use different strategies where it is applicable. For instance, in trying to reach a community, in any community that we go to, we first go through the traditional leaders because they are the custodians of the place. And sometimes through some of the political, not political parties per se, but the local level governance structures. We have the assembly members and unit committee people that we go through to lead us into the communities. And when we start, or when we make them know whatever we are bringing on board, we get the people involved and we explain to them what we actually want to do. For instance, this VPA process. In order for the community to accept and bring women on board to allow female participation, we need to do a gender analysis with the community. You need to let them understand. And the simple tool that we used was the NAPRI analysis. That is the needs, access, participation, resource, and impacts. NAPRI wheel. So you go through the wheel with the people. What are the needs of women with respect to the resource, the forest resource, and what are the needs of men? So clearly it's established that women have different needs from the men. Whilst the men are looking for the timber to take to the timber market, the women are looking for the NTFPs. They are looking for the food, they are looking for the herbs, they are looking for the honey and the smaller things that they could use to take care of the homes. Women have different access to the resource. Can they adequately go in and pick whatever they want to, just like their male counterparts? Are they allowed to participate, or do they see participation of women just like the males? Do they have resources to assess whatever they need to do? And are they impacted on, or do they impact on the forest resource just like the males do? When you're able to sit down and go through this simple analysis with them, they realize, yes, we are all human beings in the community, but we are different people. And so we all need to be on board. We all need to come on board and help ourselves to be able to protect the resource very well, and all of us will achieve what the resource has for us to achieve. So I think when we are able to explain it to them this way, they will all accept it and support us to achieve the purposes of the various implementations and initiatives that we take down to the community level. Yeah.
Claire.
So as Doreen said, just building on that, what we're seeing that women usually have on the NTFP question, they have usually use and access rights, but they don't control, they don't own. So that's a major barrier that you have there. Then there's some also good example, I think, in Burkina Faso on NTFPs. So that would be also maybe sensibilize the government and making sure that, that they remove regulatory barriers and encourage and promote community enterprises.
Yeah, just a little addition. I think I left that component of women being uneducated and how we reach out to them. Yes, so on that component, we use a lot of illustrations. And some time ago, we did a project with WWF in reaching out to community on how they could monitor the forest. And most of our educational materials were illustrations in the form of pictures on cards. So you give it to them. When you see any illegality, prompt the district official. So in that case, we draw illegality happening, you draw the district official, then you draw a community person calling the district official. So right away, they see the picture and they can relate to the picture and appropriate it. So these are some of the channels that we use to get to them.
And also, you left one more. How informed the traditional leaders are, not just to allow you into their communities, but also after you left, they can be talking to their people.
Sorry, you're not being translated, so speak into the microphone, and then we're going to Doña Melania in closing.
How informed these traditional leaders, like not just to allow you to talk to the people, but after you left, they will continue to do a follow-up training or information to the people. So how informed? Is there any training strategy for the traditional leaders, or they just allow you to talk to the people?
Okay, so it depends on the context. You know, we have different levels of traditional leadership. There are some communities you get there and you get the local chief who is actively involved in whatever you are doing. So in that case, there could be representatives and even educating the people in your absence. But there are some communities you go there and the chiefs are, let me put in quote, bigger chiefs. They don't even reside in the community. So some of these chiefs, you can not always get their participation. But those that are really interested in the process and get involved, they can get involved very well. And they themselves are agents of change at the community level. Yeah.
Okay. Entonces, doña Melania, creo que una última breve palabra, pero creo que aquí hay una discusión.
Doña Melania, your last intervention, once you have representation or participation of women, to what extent is that woman representing the interests of the communities that manage the resource or the land? It could be that it's a woman that once she's in power, similar to other men, she moves away from the community interests of the place she was born. Which comments do you have about that? One of the things that we have been working on in an organized manner to strengthening capacity of women, of the sisters in this case, you have to be careful because male chauvinism is not necessarily in the mind of men, it's also in women's minds. It crosses over anything to do with imposition, with violence or authoritarianism. It's all aggressions. And there are often cases of women that go down that line. So I think it's an issue that between us we are also discussing. We are reflecting on that in order to change these ways of thinking. Another issue that we also have to see is that often in mixed organizations, there's also women, but we're on the side, and not necessarily these women doesn't necessarily have the word, the power, voice, the decision-making. It is often just appearances. For example, in the Women's Secretariat, just to collect funds and so on, but there isn't necessarily an active representation or an effective representation of indigenous women. Many thanks. Another thing that we're seeing, there was a question that was to do with how external actors can support the previous consultation to make sure that women have voice and vote. You have to take into account that the previous consultation is between the indigenous people and the state. External actors, what they should support is in strengthening the capacity, having the information, so that women are prepared, so that when it comes to the consultation, they can defend their rights and their position. This is it in that sense.
Gracias, Doña Melania. So in conclusion, what I'm hearing, I think, from right across all the participants here is it's not just about participation, it's about meaningful participation. It is about information, bottom up, top down, that is also in the form and useful so that you can actually make decisions in a way that will improve the conditions of the community members. And so just now, I have to say thank you, very stimulating panel. I was very worried about just, sitting here and no one would turn up. And so this is very, very positive. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hand over now to the lottery and to Chatham House, who will be thanking you.